So we're back with another Fruits Basket review, and what an episode this turned out to be. Fruits Basket is arguably a near perfect story with very few faults to pick through, so it's always great to jump into these reviews knowing that we'll be faced with a great episode. There are so many key moments to dive into, but just before I do, I'll let you know that I have read the manga and I'm aware of future plot points and details. For the sake of the review though, I just like to focus on the story being told in the anime as opposed to comparing it with the manga. It allows for a smoother review and lets anime onlys join in the fun. Now with that being said, let's get started. We start the episode unexpectedly with Ayame and Mine, where Ayame questions whether Mine will stay with him even if his curse never breaks. Mine remains adamant that she'd never leave Ayame and that she's purely in love with him regardless. It's a very small moment, but equally sweet that Ayame has someone that loves him, but also slightly shocking. I didn't expect her to be aware of the curse, as it's heavily implied that Toru's the only outsider that's aware. Although it does make sense considering there's probably numerous times where he's transformed while being cold, and also looking back to how serious and caring she was about his relationship with Yuki. In hindsight, it seems like she knew more than you'd have previously thought. Then we're back at Mayuko's bookstore where Hattori asks her whether she's interested in going on a holiday. He seems almost excited at the prospect, but once she asks him if he's ever wanted to visit somewhere, he bluntly just replies no and becomes cold again. The obvious reason being that he has to remain by Akito's side. I did find it interesting though that it seems Hattori may be becoming torn again by his bond with Akito versus wanting happiness with Mayuko. It's nice to see that he's clearly opening up again and has found some semblance of happiness with it, but it's obvious that he's conflicted and sad about the Zodiac curse. He probably has mixed fears as well, worrying about how close he should get to Mayuko after Kana, and whether Mayuko would react the same way Kana did if he shared his true nature. I mean, there's a lot of baggage to unpack there, that's for sure. On top of all that, we then get a nice moment with Yuki and Machi, where Machi hands in some work to him and looks proud of herself, knowing that he'll recognise how hard she's worked, continuing off the previous episode. Before she leaves though, Yuki catches her arm, and it seems as though he wants to tell her about the curse. But before he can, Kimi opens the door and Machi runs off embarrassed. And this was another huge shock. Yuki is just ready to out his secret to Machi then and there. I mean, it was obvious they were building up their romance, but it felt pretty quick to me for him to just open up his secret. It's a good thing, but I just wasn't expecting it, I guess. I feel like it was also shocking because it really cements where Yuki stands with his feelings for Machi, and I wasn't quite expecting that until a little later in the season. And then the moment where Machi basically vaporizes was pretty funny to say the least. And then having Yuki stand there looking all depressed really calls back to when Kyo and Toru were interrupted after Kyo had given her the flower. Pure frustration. And gotta be honest, they managed to pack a lot into the first 2 minutes, and it's set up for a really strong episode. We then get to see Akito being chastised by Shigure for curling up and wallowing in self-pity, and I gotta be honest, it felt good to see Shigure serve her up like that. Regardless of whether he's in love with her or not, he tells her how it is. Even if he's being extra cruel, it's not like she hasn't really earned it. The only real questionable thing about this is really his motive. He doesn't talk to her that way because she treats the other Zodiacs horribly, but rather out of pure jealousy. Or at least that's my take on it. It was pretty interesting to see how miserable she is a while after Haru rejected her. It was also funny to see the unspoken interaction between Shigure and Kurino, with Shigure storming off angrily, not uttering a word to him. I mean, Kurino even attempts to help the situation, trying to draw them together, but Akito refuses to beg or give in to his will. You can really feel Shigure's frustration at her sheer unwillingness to let go of the Zodiac bonds, and his conviction that the Zodiacs are going to move away from her regardless of her own wishes. It's really a battle of wills at this point, and it's interesting to see the deeper meanings behind their interactions now that we know the bigger picture. Switching back to a more lighthearted scene, we have some girls watching a student walk by, and it's implied that they think it's Yuki, until he approaches Toru and it's grown-up Momiji. And what a glow-up this kid had. He arguably looks older than some of the other Zodiac members like Yuki. His growth was something I was really excited to see in the anime, and it was so great to see. And it was doubly funny that the girls reflect that he must be more mature now that he looks grown up, but to their surprise, his mannerisms and personality are still exactly the same as they were before. One thing that I wasn't expecting though was for Momiji to comment on the fact that he'd grown so quickly. I kind of felt like it was going to be an unspoken thing that he didn't acknowledge, but I thought it was a nice touch. On top of all that, it was great that Momiji embraces being older. It could be really easy for him not to enjoy it, considering he never seemed to want to be previously. He also seems to enjoy Toru's praises at the very least, and is suddenly serious about vying for her affections. Poor Momiji. Everyone knows that ship's not going to sail. In any case, they meet up with Haru and Yuki, and we have this interesting little moment where we learn that Haru didn't tell Yuki the truth about what happened to Rin in the cat house. No one seems to know about it, and it was a great little piece of information without diving directly into Haru's thoughts. It shows the dynamics of the group, and despite them all being really close friends, they're not going to share every bit of information with each other. Back at Shigure's, we have this adorable little scene between Kisa and Kyo, where Kisa plucks up the courage to say hello to him, even though she finds him intimidating. Hilariously, Kyo just seems to be thrown off by the interaction altogether. and Hiro just adds to it all, managing to confuse Kyo even more by switching attitudes where he tries to be more grown up rather than throwing constant jibes his way. It's a pretty funny scene, and it also adds some serious growth to both Kisa and Hiro, attempting to better themselves in their own way. I also enjoyed the little moment at the end where Kisa comments on how Kyo's confirmed to her that he's actually a nice person, and how she should have expected this from how he treats Toru, with Hiro agreeing. I think it shows that the Zodiac members have become really aware of the love growing between Toru and Kyo, and it's not really subtle anymore. We don't really have much time to dwell on it though, because then we get a scene where Hatori scolds Shigure for egging on Akito. And as much as these scenes are meant to be serious, you can't help but laugh at their dynamic. Shigure always manages to play off Hatori's lectures, but this time he actually gives in and actually delves into why he's treating Akito the way he is. We learn that Shigure believes that he doesn't possess the natural ability to be kind, and that he feels different from the other Zodiacs, never truly caring about being cursed. He feels as though he's twisted, and that he can't even manage to care about what he's doing, even though it's objectively cruel. He just accepts that this is who he is, and he doesn't care about trying to change. He refuses to give Akito kindness or compassion, and says that he doesn't want to become her father. And it's honestly such a loaded scene to unpack here. Shigure, someone who's constantly the jokester and generally always part of the lighthearted aspects of the story, is made out to be this heartless manipulator. It's kind of hard to accept that this is actually the true him, and to be honest, part of me doesn't really accept that. Sure, he can be cruel and manipulative to get what he wants, but I think he does still have a heart under it all. To me, it more comes across that he's so wrapped up in his desire for Akito that he pushes aside all other feelings that he could have. It's not that he's not capable, he just chooses not to. It didn't really seem like a big deal for Yuki to leave Akito's estate, otherwise why would she have let him go? So for Shigure to actually take him in is in actuality very kind. He didn't have to do that. And at that point in time, it didn't really serve any purpose to hinder Akito. Sure, maybe he did hope it would negatively affect her, but there was no guarantees. Plus, we know he despises how Akito treats the other Somas badly, as we saw at the beach house. And plus, there's been multiple moments where he has truly cared about Toru and not wanted her to get hurt and regret when she does. So this moment kind of felt conflicting. Sure, it seems like a reveal that Shigure's true nature is that he's cruel and heartless, doing this for his own benefit, but in actuality, I feel like he's just so honed in on his goal that he doesn't believe he has any good left in him. On top of that, the mention of Akito's father is pretty interesting here. In my previous reviews, I speculated that Akito's father was essentially the antithesis of Ren, having the complete opposite opinion of the Zodiac Curse, and considering Ren's been nothing but cruel to Akito, it stands to reason that Akira was probably extremely kind, and probably coddled her into the belief that the Zodiacs were meant just for her. It's almost like Akito actually influences the way the curse works in a way, making the Zodiacs behave like her father did, wanting them to treat her with unconditional kindness and love. So for Shigure saying that he wouldn't be anything like her father kind of means that he would be fighting the curse in his own way. Even though the Zodiac Curse doesn't affect him negatively, he's not going to indulge Akito's beliefs about it. And if he wants Akito all to himself, he's probably right not to. He wants the curse to break so that she doesn't have to rely on the others, and so she can truly love him completely. I mean, there's some serious mind games going on here, that's for sure. On a more lighthearted note, we head back to Shigure's where Yuki, Momiji, Haru, and Hiro are all discussing what to eat for dinner. Haru then suggests that they burn the table so as to make a barbecue, with Hiro and Yuki freaking out. And it's great to see the younger Zodiacs are becoming more integrated into the group and are forming closer attachments to certain members, like Hiro and Yuki. In any case, Momiji goes to fetch Kyo for dinner, and we get this really tense moment where Momiji challenges Kyo for Toru. It's the first moment where Momiji seems really genuinely serious about vying for Toru's affections, but in a way, also pushing Kyo to fight for her. The silence is almost eerie when Kyo doesn't respond, and it's pretty hard to gauge whether he's angry or embarrassed. It's a great scene, and it's interesting to see where Momiji stands, but it's also frustrating that we don't get to see what Kyo's truly feeling. Obviously, it's an intentional cliffhanger, but it still bugs me. Shigure arrives home and is his usual cheerful self again, and Toru approaches him and we get this interesting conversation between the two. Shigure openly shares his thoughts about how things would be different if Toru were the god of the Zodiac, and how he would be different as a result. Obviously though, he's a little bit more cryptic than that, so Toru doesn't really understand what he's saying, but it's an interesting moment. Initially, you would think that he's trying to crack onto Toru in a way. After all, he dreamt of Akito and he's in love with her, but I don't think that's true. With Toru's giving nature and constant kindness, it feels like he wonders if he would have been different as a person, not unhappy about his situation, but content, having the unconditional love from the god. He wouldn't feel the need for the curse to break, as he'd already have the god's affection. At this point, it seems like he's really tortured about his own choices and actions, wondering if he's making the right decision to push the curse to break. Especially since Toru seems to be one of the few people that make him consistently question his motives. We then have this really awesome shift where we see Akira properly for the first time, explaining the Zodiac story and how Akito is God. It reaffirms the idea that he was the one who heavily instilled in Akito that she'd always be loved by the Zodiac, and that the bonds would never break. And then suddenly, as she's reflecting on Haru leaving her, a bond does break, leading you to believe that Haru's curse broke. But no, it's Momoji's. And it's interesting that he says he wasn't expecting it so suddenly, like he already expected it to break. Considering how adamant so many of the other Zodiacs are that the curse will always last, it's interesting to see that Momoji didn't feel this way. And I don't think it's a coincidence that once he decided to grow up and come into his own, that his curse finally broke. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting it so soon in the season, but it was really awesome. Akito is of course devastated and rushes to Momoji, who no longer cares about her at all but pities her instead. And I thought it was really cool how they mirrored her begging for Momoji the same way she did all those years ago for Kurino. And how Momoji saw the same weak and fragile Akito once his curse broke, not the strong, formidable head of the family he originally thought she was. It's a very serious moment, but to be honest, it was pretty meme-worthy the way he just shuts the curtain on her, leaving her standing out there alone. Somebody needs to make a meme format out of that because it's honestly perfect. Back at school, Haru begins to search for Momoji after having felt that he seems off. It's cool to see that the Zodiacs immediately recognize when something's different with another member, even if they don't know the reason why just yet. We see Momoji watching them from the roof alone, and it seems pretty clear that he has mixed feelings about the curse breaking. Kyo then finds him and notices as well that something's different, and Momoji shocks him by telling him his curse broke, only to take it back and say that he's joking. I wish he hadn't played it down and just told the truth because it was such an awesome shock moment. But then Momoji brushes it off anyway and says that Toru would prefer if Kyo's curse broke, and alludes to the fact that Toru's in love with him. And of course, Kyo freaks out, not wanting to believe that's true, and it's pretty sad. It feels like Kyo would feel such guilt for Toru loving him knowing that he's going to be locked away, and it's frustrating as well because you don't want him to push her away. And on top of that, we get Momoji visiting Akito and telling her that he refuses to stay by her side forever, now that there's nothing tying him to her anymore. Akito hits him, and you can't help but remember the previous time she did that at the beach house. It seemed much more brutal, but in this case her hit seemed weakened and barely bothered him. The dynamic between the two's totally changed, and Akito's lost all her power. She throws it all back in his face and tells him that he's going to be lonely without her, and that his parents still won't accept him. And Momoji acknowledges this and still feels sad about the curse breaking despite being free. It's pretty sad, and you can't help but feel for Momoji as he goes through this alone, unaware that he's not the only one to have his curse broken. He feels helpless in the fact that Toru doesn't love him the way she loves Kyo, and he feels lonely, separated from the other Zodiacs that he once had an unconditional bond with. But we're ripped out of that hopeless feeling pretty quick as we see Momoji talking with his mother on the way to school and reflecting back on his visit with Akito. He refuses to let Akito decide whether he gets to be happy, and he remains hopeful that he will make his own happiness and find love one day. And I think it was pretty sweet that he pushes on and gets some closure with his mum in the end. Although, I still hate her a little bit. To be honest, this was a really loaded episode, and there's really no room for filler now as we charge towards the end of the story. I really can't wait to dive into the next episode, but that being said, those are just my thoughts and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.